Boatworks Today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexial Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much. So welcome back to the shop, everybody. Hope you're having an awesome week. My name is Andy with Boatworks Today. In this video, we're going to be talking about fairing. Now, there are a lot of different options out there, but we're going to specifically be talking about which materials to use at which stages of the actual project, as well as getting into some tips that you can use for speeding up the actual sanding process on your projects. And then we're going to cap it all off by actually rolling out some primer. Now, when we're talking about this step of the painting process, little words of wisdom, go into it with the understanding that it's going to be the most time-consuming step of the overall process. And why would that be? Pinholes. You will learn very quickly that pinholes are just a major pain in the ass. But they're a part of the process. There's nothing you can do about it. Now, let me just stress that none of this is difficult. Not at all. It's just time consuming. Now, what makes this so time consuming? Well, think of it this way. So whether you just need to touch up one or two little tiny spots, or you need to touch up a large area, regardless of that, whenever you have to lay on more material, you're dealing with cure time. So essentially you get to do a little touch up once a day, and then you get to sand it. I mean, it's depending on temperatures that you're in, and there's always a lot of variables. You're typically going to be doing a touch-up, next day sanding. Probably some more touch-ups, the following day sanding. Now again, I just want to stress, none of this is difficult. It is time-consuming. Now, speaking of cure time, before we can actually get started on this, I need to cure the fiberglass that we laid up in last week's video. So with that said, let's get started. So now when I was applying this fairing, I actually did this in two different phases. I guess phase one was going around the perimeter as well as those two center-ish kind of strips. Those center strips were basically dividers between three separate pieces of glass that I had laid up in the last video. If you didn't see that one, I'll include a pop-up window in the top right corner. In the short story, it was different ways that you can go about laying up fiberglass in upside down or inverted situations. So after that first round of fairing compound was applied, I let that set up for maybe 20-30 minutes just so that it wasn't quite so squishy, I guess, for lack of better words. And then after that was somewhat set, then I came back in and actually started laying the fairing compound over top of the three main sections that were fiberglass. And as is the case when you're working with fairing compound, you lay it up and then you sand it back. Now, if you notice here, I'm not sanding very aggressively. I'm just basically looking to knock down the high points. I'm trying to get this panel as flat as I can. I'm not gonna, bend over backwards and kill myself trying to do so, but I do want to make it as reasonably flat and smooth as I can. So here I'm just trying to save a little bit of arm work. I'm using the electric DA. I believe I'm using some 80 grit here. And I'm just essentially knocking down the high points. And all the low points there that are darker green, well, those are going to have to come back and get touched up with some additional fairing. So one of the little tricks I like to do when I'm trying to flatten a panel is to use a straight edge, lay it across, and I'll go up and down this panel about every 12 inches or so, but lay it across and then you make a mark where the panel is making contact with the straight edge. So wherever there's a gap, obviously those are going to be low, but where it's making contact with the straight edge, those are the areas that are still high and they can be sanded down. Now, after going over the entire surface, you start to see a little bit of a pattern develop here. And I will go over and circle these high points, and then that tells me where I need to be focusing my attention, again, when I'm going back over with the electric sander. Now, up to this point, all we've been doing is the rough shaping. So we knocked down what was high, and then we built up what was low with some additional epoxy. Now that we're at this point, now it's time to start doing a little bit of fine tuning. And to do that, we're going to need to use a different type of sand. If you are in good shape, you can certainly use what's called a longboard. They typically are like 16, 18, 22 inches long, give or take. But if you're in not so good shape, meaning this borderline cripple, we're going to take the electric route. Now, this year, FlexiSander came out with an American version of their electric longboard. I've used this in the past, except I had to run it through a transformer. It had to be converted to 220 volt, and the sander came with a European plug. Well, now FlexiSander has come out with the American version that runs off a standard 110, and this is going to be my first go around giving it a try. Now, the rate at which you're actually able to remove material with this electric longboard is quite a bit slower than if you were using, say, like a 6-inch sander. But that makes sense. This electric longboard is essentially working almost twice the amount of area that a 6-inch sander would be. So, you know, it is what it is. It's just basic math, I guess. But what this thing is able to do that a regular 5 or 6-inch sander cannot do is span a longer distance, hence why it's called a longboard. And depending on what it is you're looking to do with this, it can either give you a perfectly flat surface, or if you're working on something that's got a little bit more of like an arch or a radius to it, it'll give you that nice perfectly arched surface without having any dips or wobbles. I mean, if you're going to be dealing with a high gloss finish, which we will be, well, I suppose I wasn't supposed to mention that yet. Oopsies, you got a little bit of a sneak peek for the next video. But anyways, if you're dealing with a high gloss finish, any of those little dips and wobbles on the surface and on a high gloss finish, they are going to look like total crap, total amateur hour if that's the case. But with a tool like this that's able to contour to your surface, you can get that perfectly fair surface. So that round of sanding took a few hours, and I'll admit at this point I think this looks very, very nice. However, it's hard to see the details, and you know, like there's that expression, you know, the devil's in the details. And what we're going to be trying to look for now are little tiny ass little pinholes. And with the surface the way it is right now, it's kind of a hodgepodge of different colors, and it makes it very, very difficult to pick out some of these very fine details. So in order to make it easier, we're going to make this surface a consistent color, and in the process, it's going to make it a lot easier to see any of these imperfections that need to come back and to be addressed. Now, as you saw, I'm using a different fairing material here, and there's really one main reason for that. Essentially, whenever you're layering different materials, you know, one on top of the other, it is best to try and keep all of the materials within the same brand or family. Could I use Total Fair on this for doing these pinholes? Yeah, absolutely. However, where you could potentially run into a problem is if, let's just say, the painting project is finished down the road, you start to see some blistering or bubbling or, you know, whatever may happen. You call up the manufacturer. In this case, it's going to be Alexial. The first question that they're going to ask you is, did you use all, our materials from start to finish, starting with the primer? If your answer is anything other than yes, you're not going to have a leg to stand on as far as having any kind of tech support or warranty or anything like that. So from the point that I switched over to rolling out this primer, from this point forward, I'm going to be using all Alexial products. Up to this point, it was all Total Boat, but from this point on, it's all going to be Alexial. Now, when you're chasing down pinholes, that seems like a very straightforward and obvious thing, but once again, the devil is in the details, and this is a perfect example. When I was spraying this material, so far I've only come at filling these pinholes from one direction, and as you saw, essentially it only filled one half of the hole. So when you're doing these, you need to make your motions in multiple different directions over the same area to ensure that you're adequately packing every single one of these pinholes. These pinholes are tiny. You need to actually force the material down in there to completely fill them. They're not like a large chip or something where the material is easily gonna go where it needs to go. You need to actually work this compound into these holes because they're so tiny. So remember in the beginning of this video when I said that this fairing is going to be the most time-consuming step of this entire process? Well, this is why. I've only gone through and I've done one round of chasing down these pinholes, and to be quite perfectly honest, it is almost unheard of to be able to do just one round and actually have all the pinholes addressed. More oftentimes than not, you're looking at having to do this 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Because what happens is that every time, so you come through, you do one round of pinholes, when you sand it, every time you take this, you sand this surface, you run the potential of opening up more new pinholes that then need to be chased down and sanded back down. So it's a little bit of you go round and round for a while, and it's just, again, I've said this I think 3 times already, but the devil is in the details. This is one of those steps that if you are not very, very diligent, it will show on your final product. When you're getting ready to paint, whether it's a car or a boat, whatever it may happen to be, 95% of all of your time is going to be spent doing prep. The final show coats, that's going to be 5% of the whole project. So at this point, you have a couple options moving forward. Either one, you can reprime the surface so it's a uniform in appearance and then come back and address any of the pinholes that you see. Or you don't have to prime it right now. If you're able to go through and just spot fill each of the pinholes that you're able to find without priming, that's perfectly fine as well. Personally, I've got extra material mixed up, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna roll it out so it doesn't get wasted. And then over the next, few days, I'll come back and I'll chase down, whatever pinholes pop their head up and get this panel prepped for the next video. And on that note, I think I'm gonna wrap this week up. So as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found this helpful. And if you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Thank you in advance. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave those down below. I will do my best to follow up with you. And as always, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend, and I will see you in the next video.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.